Hello, and welcome to Connected Voices with Ventev. I'm your host, Jared VanAllen. This is part of our Meet the Geek series, and today I've got one of my favorite geeks, Jeyler Zabala, with Tessco Technologies. Jeyler is a solutions architect specializing in DAS, cellular DAS, and public safety DAS, as well as some of the other wireless technologies we deal with. Jeyler, welcome, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Jared, for having me on your podcast. Wonderful to be here.
I appreciate that. So the Meet the Geek series is not just a little bit more of an in-depth view of some of the technologies that we'd like to make sure customers and our partner community understand. Today, we're going to be talking about the wide world of wideband and kind of why that matters in some of those technologies we mentioned. So cellular DAS, public safety DAS, CBRS, even Wi-Fi. Now, Jeyler, I know you've been heavily involved with Ventev and our product management team, relaying information from some of your customers, and specifically as it applies to some of those radio technologies we just talked about. Can you go over a couple of the questions that customers typically ask that lead us to why wideband?
Well, Jared, we are in the front end of typically any of these communication deployments because we are part of the solutions architect, solutions engineering team at Tessco. We get engaged by customers requesting information regarding typically, projects that are going to be deployed from 18 months from now to 2-3 years. So people are very reluctant to not future-proof their designs, if you will, right? So they want to be able to deploy something that they know they don't have to rip and replace in a couple of years. And technology is constantly changing. And as we know, we're constantly opening new wireless spectrum, or changing spectrum, or rearranging a spectrum, rebanding a spectrum. So people are very, very much open to the ideas of having passive and active that are capable of being future-proof, if you will. So that being said, there are limits to what we can do, but typically if you go with, say, wide-banded equipment like Ventev manufacturers, then you're pretty sure that you're going to be, stuff is going to be installed for a long, long time.
So by wideband, my presumption of what we're talking about is starting at the lower end of the typical cellular spectrum into the spectrum for cellular that's used by public safety entities, first responders, and much of that in response to kind of what we saw with 9/11, right? And being able to assure that communications are available. But also, the CBRS, citizens band radio systems, and even into the Wi-Fi spectrum up to this, 6 gigahertz spectrum, newly released.
Typically, we refer to wide-banded equipment in between 600 megahertz and, like you said, 6 gigs. That will cover pretty much anything on the 600 band for low-band cellular, 700 and 800 for public safety, 2.4 gigs for Wi-Fi, 3.5 to 3.7 gigs for CBRS, private LTE. There's a new spectrum for public safety that they're trying to push that is going to be around 4.9 gigahertz, and then all the way up to 5.8 to 6 gigahertz, like you said. So really, when we say widebanded, we're talking 600 to 6,000 or 600 megahertz to 6 gigahertz. That's typically the range.
That's a pretty wide spectrum of radio. And that really covers a lot of different technologies. And by the way, one of the things that we're also seeing is kind of a collapsing of some of those technologies into, single radios as we push forward. That would seem to me that wideband deployment, especially of things like the passive elements, antennas, cables, connectors, splitters, tappers, all of those things, would actually have to be able to carry the signal that I put on from kind of any of the radios that I plug into those connections. Am I seeing that right?
You're perfectly right. And to give you the perfect example, ever since we started with the public safety mandates in the United States, public safety has been a band that carries cells between VHF, UHF, and 7,800. And a couple of years ago, we started merging into cellular, and people realize, especially the ASJs, the jurisdictions, and the public safety community started to realize that most emergencies start with with a call to 911, and basically we want to have cellular coverage within areas where public safety bands are served. So we're going to start seeing more deployments where public safety and cellular are going to be together, or at least required to be together. There's some states that already have mandates and codes in place to make sure that people can dial 911 in case of emergencies, fires, shooting, things of that nature. And that's why you see more and more active and passive that are going to have to be capable of carrying the low end and the high end of the frequency spectrum. Yes.
Okay, understood. So it's not just what's in place today, but what's coming at us in the near future, potentially with some of those bands as well. Well, that makes a little more sense as to why you've applied pressure to Ventev to say, hey, guys, we've got to be able to cover all these spectrums. Now, I know you've also done a lot of work directly with folks like Suketu Shah, who's our product manager for some of these product sets, but it's not just the antenna, is it? Right? It's everything else that comes into play. So what other elements have to be wideband if I'm expecting an antenna to carry wideband?
Well, the most obvious ones are the passive, the tappers and couplers, the lightning protection. All of those ancillary products that are connected to the antennas and the active has to be able to withstand those frequency ranges. And I just for relevance, there is a big push for public safety in the United States nowadays, and that is a very regulated deployment, if you will, by the public safety community. And there are some requirements for grounding protection, lightning protection, active and passive communication through the equipment deployed. And that's why we've been in constant communication with Ventev as a manufacturer to make sure that we have the complete offer in the portfolio.
That's awesome. Hey, while we're on that, things are getting hot in Florida, right? So public safety DAS is a hot topic right now. And especially in states like Florida, where you reside. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to what those milestones are and where things stand, at least in your state?
Well, yeah, Florida has been a hotbed for public safety for probably the better part of last 12 years. It's probably started in 2012 when the legislation included wording regarding the emergency radio responders systems in buildings. And one of the biggest ones just happened this 1st of January of 2025, where all existing buildings have to comply with that rule. There were years of the code 2015, 2018, where it was only applied to high rises and new construction. But I believe in 2021, sometime 2022, the legislation said every existing building, we're not going to grandfather anymore. You have to apply. Have an integrator come to your premises, make sure that the radio systems work, and that happened. That just happens. So if you haven't done any of that as a building owner in Florida, you're late to the game, and eventually, when your annual inspection comes around, you might be fined, or you might have an issue with your occupancy permit and whatnot.
So literally, people could be put out of business if they're not meeting this timeline, which just passed, is right?
Correct. You're going to be warned, probably. They're going to give you a warning, and then daily fines and things of that nature. Since it's brand new, I don't know how the enforcement is going to look like, but definitely, you're going to have fines and things that you're going to have to correct. And probably eventually, if you have a lacking building, public safety wise, then you're going to have to deploy something to fulfill that requirement.
Now, I know other states are following suit, and of course, you'd have to look at the individual jurisdiction to determine what the timelines are, but that's pretty serious that we're at the timeline for one of the most populated states in the country to say you've got to have the ability to provide public safety, distributed antenna system, connectivity in your building, correct?
That is correct. And typically how Florida goes, the East Coast move, and then how California goes, the West Coast move. So Texas is kind of following a different path, but they all follow either NFPA or IFC, International Fire Code, or National Protection Agency rules. And they both kind of have the same timelines. They all move in 3-year cycles. And they pretty much all are trying to standardize. It's going to be hard. There are 3,200 ASJs in this country, so I don't think we're ever going to get to a unified code, but they're all moving in the same direction, which is pretty much making sure that we have good coverage, good penetration of public safety signal into buildings. And before it was new buildings, now it's in every existing building. So I think eventually we're going to get there, not in a unified manner, but it pretty much in the desire to have good coverage in most of those buildings.
That makes a lot of sense, which brings me to a couple of questions, because one of the biggest problems we run into with Ventev is the fact that customers are saying, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. I've never had to do a distributed antenna system, right? So that requires involving a VAR or a partner. But even then, the design of that is not necessarily a specialty of a lot of those organizations. So tell me a little bit about that piece of it. Where does Tessco and your group come into that?
So our group, the solutions development team, is basically here to help those integrators that don't have the expertise, the RF expertise. They have the expertise of saying, laying the cable or making the connections. But we have software that is capable of predicting coverage for any RF source. And we can do the design for you as long as you, of course, purchase through us. And we're here to help you deploy, pre-sales, post-sales support. And we are in direct contact with manufacturers to give you the most advanced and the best deployment possible when you're out there.
So there's not a lot of distributors that offer, that kind of service on wideband products like DAS or CBRS. So that's interesting to note. And we'll also include the URL to engage the solutions architect sales engineering team with Tessco along with this podcast. But it brings up an interesting point, Jeyler, in that as I'm looking to deploy these things, I have to design it correctly. I have to include all of the elements that are required, the passives, the actives. Ventev really deals more with the passive elements, the splitters, the tappers, the antennas, the cables, the connectors. But that's not all that goes into those deployments, is it?
No. And going to your previous point, Tessco is the only distributor that offers a group like us, a set of experts. We are about 5 of us in the DAS space. We have over 100 years of experience. And so we're pretty old. That's what it means. But we have a group that is capable of, again, doing IP wave design for you, prediction capabilities. And to your second point, no, not only does it requires what Ventev sell, which is basically the passive and the antennas, but we also have to be able to do link budgets, active component selection, make sure that the components that we select are NFPA or IFC approved, so that when the integrator goes and deploy these things, they have an inspection that is going to be successful and they can move on to the next job.
That makes a lot of sense. And particularly as we get into kind of what am I attaching to that? So when I'm deploying this as a partner and I'm deploying a DAS solution, that doesn't mean that that's the only radio spectrum that may potentially, over the course of time, be carried over much of that implementation, the network infrastructure for that implementation. Is that correct?
Correct. And, it goes beyond. When you're dealing with public safety, you have to have battery backups, for instance, which is are very important because you don't want your system to be there in case of, say, a fire, and then you lose power and then you're out of communications. I mean, we all know anytime an incident like this happens, something major is happening, right? So you want to make sure that the system is properly backed up. And right now, a lot of the states require 24 or 12 hours of battery backup. That's an important piece, important component. Then you have the actual radio, the BDA, or the bi-directional amplifier that provides that communication inside of the building. And then, of course, like you say, what Ventev provides is antennas, tappers, couplers, splitters, DC protection, Yagis and Omnis, different types of antennas for the deployments that you're intending to do.
That makes sense. And then the aesthetics become important in that as well. So one of the things that Ventev is well known for is aesthetic deployments. And as you look at some of our product sets, for example, we have an antenna that's literally, what is it, just over less than half an inch thick.
Yep. Well, that's it. Building owners are very concerned with the aesthetics and how their buildings look like. So before, antennas were an afterthought. People didn't matter that they show, but nowadays with buildings being, Lloyd glass and being pretty, there is a big drive for antennas kind of not being there, right? So Ventev is pretty good at creating products that are aesthetically pleasing, that don't look like they're there. And that's why you have a lot of enclosures and things of that nature that helps, the people integrating the systems, making it look pretty, if you will.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. That absolutely makes some sense. Deployment. So the customer engages with their value-added reseller or partner. That partner engages with you. What does a deployment kind of look like? And do you generally find the accuracy of those predictive surveys to be, functional deployable solutions?
If typically we recommend our value-added integrators that they provide us with a site survey. A site survey basically means, hey, this is where my cables are going to go through. This is where I think I have better access for my antennas. This is where my crawl space is going to be. This is where the BDA needs to be located. Remember, there's a lot of rules about where to locate what, the battery backup, the connections to the electrical panel, connections to the fire panel for the alarming in case things go south. So if you provide us with good information, 99% of the time that prediction software is accurate, right? I mean, we're going to be 95% of the time, we're going to be exactly where we tell you to put it. Now, if there's a column in the middle that wasn't in the plans and we ask you to go through it, you might not be able to do that. You might have to find another way. But it's fairly accurate as long as we have the correct information. We have clear floor plans. We have non-segmented plans. And as long as you do that, we're going to give you a design that you're going to pretty much go in, run your cable, install your antennas, turn on the system, commission it, and you should be there.
So it's a lot like the Wi-Fi world that I'm used to dealing with, in the preparation and what you do before you actually get to deployment is the most important piece, and the deployment is just a result of that, right?
That's correct.
And by the way, in the wireless industry, doing that survey, either a physical site survey and or a well-done predictive survey, significantly reduces remediation costs after the install, which in some cases can run up to 25 to 30% of the total cost of the budget if it's not done right.
That is correct. And that is very, very important. Like I said, if you provide us with all of the information and we account for it in the prediction software, 99% of the time you should have a seamless deployment. There might be these, weird case where a wall was destroyed or knocked down or bring up after the fact, and we might have earlier versions of the architectural plans, but typically we don't run into that. And if the site survey is done the right way, you should have no issues.
All right. So the other piece to that, Jeyler, is once assets are in place, I don't want to rip and replace them. That goes back to the whole theory of wideband. So connectivity into those are pretty much standard connections. It's going to be an SMA connector, N style connector. What other kind of gotchas are there when we talk specifically about public safety DAS and cellular DAS? Are there any things that sit out there which are a typical kind of, hey, if you miss this, you're kind of not in a great position, and that you've seen at least in engaging on these types of deployments?
Very important when you're talking Wi-Fi public safety, PIM is not a concern. However, when you're dealing with a commercial carrier DAS system, PIM comes into place, right? Passive intermodulation. So making sure that your passive are PIM rated and have the highest PIM rating, or at least they're required by the carrier that you are rebroadcasting from, it's very important. Second thing is, keep in mind, typically, like you say, Wi-Fi is SMA connections, public safety is N-type connections, and then cellular is 4.3 for the most parts. And the other thing is public safety, you have a lot of enclosures requirements. Antennas are not typically free wire in most states. So you have to have, enclosures for where the tappers are going to be, metal enclosures and things of that nature. So I will suggest people for public safety, make sure that you read the requirements of your specific locality, just to make sure that you don't have those, oh my God, I forgot about that type deal.
That's a great item to keep in the back of your head. So once again, we're to preparation, making sure that you're engaging a resource like your team with Tessco Technologies that's able to actually say, hey, remember these things. These are very important. You can't forget them. So that's a very important point, and thank you for bringing that up. When customers or partners engage, right, they're engaging through Tessco Technologies, we'll provide the URL they engage with. What's kind of a typical turnaround? How long does it take me to actually put this together with a plan that I can put in front of that partner or VAR?
Typically, once we require you to submit a form through our website, right? And once you do that and we have all of the information, and if the information is accurate and complete, typically we're returning that design back to you within 5 to 7 business days. If you're a large customers, and in fact, for all of our customers, we charge very little for the design itself. The understanding is always, we give you almost like a free design with the understanding that you're going to give us the business back for passive and actives. And we pride ourselves to say we do over 2,000 designs a year typically. And a lot of big customers of ours rely on our design services to get most of their deployments done.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Well, Jeyler, it's been a pleasure. I have a better understanding now of why deploying wideband products are important within the infrastructure, because there could be multiple different wireless technologies deployed on them. I have a better understanding of why it's important to assure that the peripherals, those tappers, splitters, lightning protection, etc., are also capable of handling those multiple bandwidths, as well as how we engage resources, and in this case, a pretty unique resource with Tessco Technologies. And that makes a lot of sense now as to why my product management team will say, "Hey, Jared, we get a lot of request and pressure from the Tessco team to assure that these products meet these specific requirements." Thank you very much for joining us today for Meet the Geek. Jeyler, I hope that we see a lot more interaction with you, especially as customers become more and more aware of the deadlines that are passing them by today.
Correct. And thank you for having me. And as always, we at Tessco are here to help. And if you have any questions related to wireless, connectivity, don't hesitate to contact us.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeyler. Have a wonderful day. And thanks for joining Connected Voices with Ventev.